All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for, I think, the fourth session of the Masters Conference from US Rowing this year. Today, we have a great talk from our Director of Safeguarding, Tom Rooks, and we're going to be talking about safety considerations for Masters athletes. Just some housekeeping items. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A throughout. And if it makes sense, we can ask them in between the presentation, but otherwise we'll wait towards the end. Without further ado, Tom, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. By the way, Sarah and I work a lot together. If you go to any of our national championship races, we spend a lot of time together looking at the clouds. So, among other things. So, by way of introduction, my name is Tom Rooks. Some of you I'm sure I've met, some of you I haven't, and I saw some of the names that are coming to this. I'm really excited to share this time with you. It's a real privilege anytime I can talk about safety and rowing. By way of introduction, my background. So I am a third generation rower. My grandfather started rowing right around 1925 at San Diego Rowing Club, and he was the president there for quite a long time in the 70s. And my dad rowed there, and then I did not row until I got sick of getting beat up in basketball and went out for the rowing team because I was tall and goofy and fell in love with it. And I rowed for Boone High in Orlando, Florida. I rowed at UCF, where I met my beloved wife, who she's still a competitive masters rower. She's one of those, like many of the masters rowers, as we get older and we are empty nesters, we suddenly have a lot of time to train. So my wife is, her 2K is 30 seconds better than her PR was in college, which is crazy. Anyway, so met my wife around UCF. I started coaching immediately after high school, coached at Boone High starting in 92. And then I coached when I joined the military wherever I got stationed. So I coached for Prince William, for Garfield, for Barnstable Crew up in Massachusetts. And then 2014, moved to Williamsburg, Virginia. And my wife said, let's start rowing again. I said, great. They said, hey, we don't have a coach. Will you help? And like many of you out there that are coaches, that's kind of the way it goes, right? You get back into it. And then coaching became my entire life as we built the youth program at Williamsburg Boat Club. And then a couple of years ago, Chris Chase said, do you want to help out with safety? And I said, sure, not knowing that the road would take us to all the places it has. Coast Guard wise, and again, this is just so you understand the background I have. I started off as a navigator for large Coast Guard ships traveling all over the world. Then I became a coxswain, which is for the Coast Guard, the person responsible for our small boats. So I became a tactical pursuit and heavy weather coxswain, which meant I was either driving little boats really fast or I was driving little boats into really big waves. I did law enforcement for 15 years. I did critical incident stress counseling. I held command. And eventually I got to run the school for my trade for all the bosun mates in the Coast Guard. So I had a pretty awesome career. I really loved it. A lot of search and rescue, a lot of law enforcement, a lot of boats, lots of sunny days out on the ocean. We can probably move to the next slide. And by the way, that's my daughter who rowed for Washington College. And that's my son who rowed for Williamsburg Boat Club. And now he's a student up at Berklee College of Music because he's a rock and roll guy and we can only make him row for so long. So safeguarding. Safeguarding is a sort of new to US rowing concept. And I think it's really important that we kind of lay out what we mean by that. Early in my tour at US Rowing, we'll talk a bit about this. We started realizing really quickly that the same problems had multiple origins, multiple cultural origins in the sport. And also, a lot of times there's a lot of overlap. The example I used recently in an interview was if you go to a regatta and we have white caps and 1 foot waves, and the regatta is an hour and a half behind, but you're still required to launch on time, and you have an athlete get hypothermic and have to get transported to the hospital. If you think about it, we have a safe sport incident that is what we would call a non-contact physical misconduct, right? You have a safety incident. What were we doing? What were we not doing to mitigate the weather? How do we put people in this position? You might also have a referee complaint, right? You might have a coach problem with your coach. So a lot of these incidents have a lot of overlap, right? And what we're trying to do is reduce harm. So when we talk about safeguarding at US Rowing, we're talking about everything we do that reduces harm. It's really just as simple as that. Be that harm physical, be it psychological. So that's what we're talking about, safeguarding. So the challenges in our sport, I am forever thankful for my job, and I'm thankful for the leadership of Amanda Kraus, our CEO, and Rich Cajopo, the executive director, who's my direct supervisor. Because when I took the position, they were very open. They said, we don't have a firm grasp on where are the gaps in safety in our sport. We know they're out there, but why don't you go out there, figure it out, and then we'll come up with a plan of attack to address them. So these findings I've actually kept intact for the last 2 years because they remain pretty true. Over the years, we've had a lot of great people make a lot of good efforts in different places, right? We have excellent rowing podcasts you can hear about, learn about masters rowing and ways to do it safer and better, both for yourself and as a boater. We had, Willie Black did great work in safety. Mike Davenport's done great work in safety. Of course, Margot Zalkine, Mark Messing at RowSafe. The problem with these efforts were they haven't been linked to a comprehensive approach, supported by the governing body itself. So where we might have a great video or a conference, we haven't done a great job of having a whole safety approach that is consistent, predictable, and sort of builds as we go. The ways I explain that is we're a sport with about 1,500 rowing clubs, which means often we have about 1,500 silos. We have 1,500 places that are uniquely operating sort of their own franchise of rowing. And whether or not they operate safely is kind of very just sort of dependent on luck, or if their leadership team in a given moment prioritizes it, right? So we don't do a lot of great sharing of information. We also have a very, very much it hasn't happened yet culture. We can picture a lot of things going wrong. We do have a lot of near misses. I can't tell how many times I've been in a quad and we've buzzed the tower near the dock, basically trying to attack our piece, only to find that we came within 6 inches of running over somebody pushing off the dock. The amount of near misses in our sport that we don't act upon to prevent from becoming real is very problematic. Safety is club roulette. Again, that's sort of the concept of, look, there are great coaches out there. There are fantastic leaders out there who are doing a lot to focus on safety. But there are just as many, or there are many that are out there that just don't have a background in it. And so the club just doesn't have mature approaches to safety. I think about this a lot in the college club rowing scene, right? You might have one administration that loves rowing and they're very involved, and the coach has been there 20 years and cares a lot about safety. And you might have one with a 20-year-old head coach who just hasn't been down that road before. They haven't had those problems, right? Another challenge for us to face is water sports equal risk, right? Before working for US Rowing, I also worked for Ironman Triathlon as a swim safety director. And we know that if you're on the water, there is an increased risk to than say being in a gym on a treadmill, right? The less controlled the environment, the more things can happen. You'll hear me say this a few times. Our job is not to make the sport have zero risk. Risk is part of what we love. I want to occasionally get splashed in the face when I'm rowing. I want to know that I'm out there in the environment. I want to be in a boat that goes really fast because it's lean and mean and can glide with my effort, right? I wouldn't do this sport if you put outriggers on each of, if you put pontoons to each of my riggers and maybe wear a fully inflated life jacket and a helmet, I'm probably not likely to do the sport. We're not here to get rid of risk. We're here to mitigate it, and we're here to get rid of chance, right? So risk is acceptable. We can tolerate it, mitigate it. As masters rowers, we have a lot of authority to do so. What we want to get rid of is the part where we just take chances and say, well, that's never happened before. I don't think it'll happen, so let's just see how it goes, right? That's not good. The other one, and you'll hear this a lot, is we don't have good data. We don't have good historical data. We have a lot of good stories, right? If you row in the Philly area, you might hear about Kippy Little, someone choose to tell you about what happened to her. But that doesn't have a historic data that all coaches have their training informed by, right? We have these one-offs that live as long as the people around them care. We need to do better with data. So what we've done, right? So the things, I think it's important to share with you what we've done, and we're going to go into very master specific things here, but I think working for the NGB, I think it's important to share with you, where are we going, right? When I came on board, Margot Zalkine was kind enough to get re-involved in the safety committee, which she was the original founder of. And she's done incredible work. Our safety committee has grown. We have regional representation. We try to represent every aspect of rowing, from masters to adaptive to NCAA collegiate women's rowing to recreational youth rowing. We have a pretty good Our committee is really functional now. You should have been seeing that we're one more of those emails you get. Quarterly, you get a quarterly newsletter from us, annually an annual safety report. And what we're trying to do there is start getting the data to you, right? Start sharing with you, what are we seeing? What's happening around the sport? What can we do to do a little bit better? And I think that's really important. Moving on to the next slide. The big project for me that was the safety guidelines. When I came on board, they were called the safety expectations policy, and they're good, but they were really, really, really long, and they were very much more suggestive than policy, right? A lot of take this into consideration or sort of explaining how to respond to something. But the problem with that is if you look at the US Rowing Code of Conduct, it says that you have to follow safety policies. Well, if the policies are hard to understand or weave through, then that's not really a fair situation to put you in. So what we've done is we've reorganized the safety guidelines and we've created an annual modification sort of system. Like we're working on them now to get them out to the public for review in the summer and fall to make new every year. The goal is to keep making them smaller and more direct so that it becomes more of a, if you will, a 10 commandments of rowing than a discussion of concept. So that was the main goal. With that, we created the safety audit checklist, which you'll see on our website. It's pretty easy to fill out, maybe takes an hour to do. Our strong suggestion at clubs is fill one out every year. And I encourage you to have the newest person do it, right? If you have the newest coach on your team fill out the checklist, they'll see things with new eyes. You know, I have a problem where, you know, like in my house, I don't even think there is a mountain of laundry folded on that chair anymore because I've walked past it enough times, right? But if a guest comes to my house, they go, hey man, I don't know if you guys own a dresser, but what do you say we put those clothes away, right? So if you use the safety audit checklist, it'll kind of give you a snapshot of where your club's at, what's going on, what's the condition of your safety program. All right, the incident reporting system. This one is something I'm incredibly proud of, and it makes me kind of sad. So we created the incident reporting system. To be honest with you, nothing good is new under the sun, right? I completely stole this from British Rowing. British Rowing has a very mature incident reporting system. They get about 2,000 incident reports a year. So just take that in. They get about 2,000 a year. Last year we cleared 50. So I know that it's going to take time. But the point of the incident reporting system is here before you, right? It's so that when you are, I look back, one of my favorite people is a young man I coached named Nate Baker. And when Nate Baker went to his college in Texas, at the end of his freshman year, he was asked to be the head coach for 75 athletes with 2 assistant coaches. And I think of like, where would Nate Baker go to learn, what should I worry about here? What are the kind of problems we have around here and what can I learn from it, right? Without just calling coaches and saying, give me your wisdom. What could he study, right? So I think the incident reporting system, we created a system that allows anonymous reporting. It's also how you connect to your US Rowing insurance. So if you have a problem and you know it's going to become an insurance issue, we require that you fill out an incident report so that we can see kind of what happened, who's involved. It's also, there's one simple button there that says request assistance. If you request assistance, somebody on the safety committee or myself will get engaged, right? A lot of times people go, look, we think we did everything right, but can we talk through what happened? Happy to do so, right? And this is also through this reporting system where we create things like last year, you'll see in the annual report, we talked about how we've had a serious uptick in the amount of problems with uncoxed boats at regattas. Effectively, people very focused on their warm-ups or their, you know, whatever thing they're doing, their 5-part pause drill or their big power 10 that's going to make them ready to win. And then they hit other boats, right? So we've got that from the amount of cases that we are seeing around the country in that space. So that's what the incident reporting system is. This is my biggest call out of how can you help fill out an incident report whenever you have a real problem or a near miss. Okay, what does a safe sport look like, right? We all have a responsibility to each other. I mean, I just feel that way, right? I have a responsibility to the sport, but so does every participant, right? If you love rowing and you don't do it only by yourself, we are accountable for each other, right? We have to care about each other to some level. US Rowing's version of a safe sport to me looks like this. Our guidelines should be clear, right? all levels of participants should have a form of education. We've been working on the launch, you'll see there have been a lot of modules added that are for everybody. I feel like there's, the ultimate form of self-confidence for me is that I'm willing to share anything with anyone at any level, right? Like there's no gatekeeping. So we want to have education for the learn to rower all the way through the seasoned national team coach, or, however far access the sport. We need to learn from our lessons, right? When things happen, we have a responsibility not to let them happen again. And if I haven't already, let me pre-apologize during this talk. There are probably going to be a few moments where I say some things that are pretty impactful, at least to me or to you. And I apologize if it's a bit too much, but it's already happened in the sport that the promise I made to a child on his deathbed's father was that the loss of his son would make our sport safer. As we held each other crying, that was my promise to him. That's what US Rowing owes you, right? When the thing happens, we do all we can so it doesn't happen again. The other one with that is consistency. US Rowing and most NGBs, it's kind of hard. Staff comes and goes, motivations come and go, but we have to communicate consistently and be accountable. We have to be accountable, not just through the lawsuits that occur from time to time, but we need to show accountability for the sport we love, and I frankly still love it. All right, Masters rowers. All right, I'm excited about this because I was thinking for this audience, right? What are the appropriate things for Masters rowers, right? Masters rowers have strengths that a lot of our youth rowers don't have. Self-awareness, right? When I'm coaching a Sarah and I had a just anecdote. We had a lot of young rowers last year that struggled in the sun on a certain morning in Sarasota. One of them was a coxswain who I think was 12 years old. And as I was carrying him in my arms, he kept saying, "I think I'm dying." And then he started just giggling. And then 2 minutes later, he was happy and go lucky and good to go. He doesn't know his body that well yet, right? Overreaction, lack of self-awareness. As master rowers, we tend to have been through some things. Utilize that, right? When I think about your strengths as master rowers, I want you to leverage them, right? If you're a master's rower and something doesn't feel right, trust it. Trust it, right? It's as simple as that. Your biggest risk as a master's rower is a medical event on the water, right? That can be from a mechanical issue like a pulled muscle or a problem with one of your joints to our most common cause of death in the sport, which is a heart problem while you're rowing. Trust yourself, listen to yourself. The other one is your experience. You know, waiting for the "I told you so" moment at the boathouse doesn't make the next generation safer, right? Masters rowers have experience. You've been to that regatta. You've seen what happens when the wind's out of that direction. You've been through these things. And so I think it's really powerful. A powerful thing for masters is to share their experiences. And that's also in leadership, right? When a club is forming its safety policies, right? Somebody needs to come with a perspective and say, "Look, I've worked, I've worked in risk mitigation at that power plant for 20 years, and what we're doing here just is not the adult way to do it. Can we step back?" Right? You masters rowers have a lot of strengths. I know we think a lot about our other issues, but I think about your strengths quite a bit. Your networks, right? You probably know people who row. You probably you probably know people who row in other boathouses, other clubs, other places, right? Network with each other, please, right? I love when I find out that a waterway is very busy and has formed a safety committee between 5 clubs, right? Even if you just meet once a year to make sure the traffic pattern is still real. Form those networks, engage with people, right? I hold masters rowers responsible more than youth rowers or anyone else for, like, let's let the rising tide of safety lift all boats towards a better sport, right? The other one is communication. I am sometimes surprised. We have in boating, and this was a lot in my Coast Guard life, we look at boats as kind of our freedom machines. It's our escape from speed limits, and it's our escape from TPS cover sheets or whatever it may be, right? But one of the letdowns that occasionally happens is people feel like, well, I'm having great, I'm being a kid again, but they aren't willing to speak up, right? Now we need to have appropriate times to speak up. We need to have enough couth or emotional IQ sometimes to know that. But my goal is that masters rowers are a communicating bunch that says, "Hey, coach, I know we went out there today, but that felt like we were past the edge of where we should have been. Like, what am I missing, or what can we do better? Right? It's as simple as that. It's as simple sometimes as just taking a step back, zooming the lens out, and then saying, how, let's do better. Right? So these are your strengths that I see as masters rowers. I'm gonna take a sip of this coffee. Challenges. While your body awareness as a master's rower is great, we also have medical considerations. I am what's considered a 100% permanently disabled veteran. I lack cartilage in most of my joints. So I know that when I go to the gym, there's a certain type of movements or certain things I can do, and there's certain things I need to be careful about, right? I know that I'm at risk at my age and my lifestyle for my heart having an arrhythmia or some other problems. I've just recently gone through some stress testing on myself, right? So I need to be aware of those. So when we talk about medical considerations, the best thing you can do as a master's rower is just periodically get yourself checked out, right? Go tell your primary care manager the truth. Hey, I row however hard, however often, right? How am I looking? Am I good? What's my last EKG showing me? Are we keeping up with things? Does my heart rate look right to you, right? Get yourself checked out. Stay on top of those things. We're going to have risks. That's fine, but to go into it unknowingly is really problematic, right? So medical considerations are a big deal for us. Complacency is the next. Um, again, that board has been broken on the dock for 5 years, but we've all learned to step over it. I mean, that's just waiting for someone to break their ankle, right? Right. So the complacency of, it hasn't happened yet, or it's been a while, is pretty bad. And I'm going to be really honest too. There's a lot of primarily men I've rowed with who will bluntly say, hey, if this is how I go out, so be it, right? Well, that's probably not true if you have a family. They're probably not viewing that as a really good idea. And I don't want to be in the boat with you, frankly, when you die. So if you have a problem, please get it checked out. Please be communicating with your team. Please take effective measures, right? The other challenge for masters, and we have a whole slide on this coming up, is a lack of safety boats. Masters tend to row more independently, right? We less often rely on a coach, which is a great thing. But with that lack of safety boats, I mean, it's a reduction typically in our safety as rowers, right? It also means we tend to have less people looking out for us. We tend to have a bit more tunnel vision, right? So the lack of safety boats can create a challenge for masters rowers that we need to assess and mitigate. And the other one is different outcome goals, right? Where I row, there are some of our rowers that we lovingly think of as recreational members, right? They want to see the bald eagles flying over and the fish jumping. It is totally inappropriate for us to say, well, do you mind keeping up because we're going to try and get the stroke rate up to a 36 because we have a regatta coming up in 2 weeks, and darn it, those Hampton Roads people are going to beat us again if we don't train hard, right? If that person says, this is not for me, I cannot do this, I don't want to do this, we've got to adapt the road to meet that, right? That's the thinking with the big picture. So different outcome goals can be one of the challenges masters have, right? Very, very wild range of goals, whereas most high school kids and most college kids are put into a funnel of, you should be suffering every day, and that's what we do here, right? Or some variation of that. So independent rowing is an interesting thing to me. There are a lot of great questions this brings up. And to be honest with you, I get, I would say 80% of all the questions I get about safety at US rowing are about either PFDs or swim tests, right? I'm just to be very honest with you, when it comes to just pure physical safety, PFDs and swim tests that's the question I get the most, right? When we're rowing independently, a boat is a vessel, right? So a water toy, and this is going into a bit of Coast Guard definition, a water toy is something that you use near the shore. You aren't using it to convey things or people from one place to another. And this is why, like, if you're paddleboarding at the ocean, you don't have to have a life jacket, but the minute you're paddleboarding to go from A to B, you become a vessel. You're now using that as transit, right? If I could change something about masters rowing, it would be that we view uncoached rowing as we are responsible for a vessel, just like a tugboat, just like a ski boat, just like a bass boat. We are now in a vessel. Say we're in a quad. Well, if we have me in it and we're all 4 of me, I guess we have about 1,300 pounds out there between the boat and the athletes. So we have a 1,300 pound vessel with no one facing forward going down the river, what is our responsibility to each other? Right? What is our responsibility to the other boaters on the waterway? Also, what are our risks in that situation? What are our responsibilities? How do we mitigate them? So we'll go through a couple here. Weather conditions, right? What I tell people at every club is know your numbers, right? Know your numbers. What is the wind speed at which you are not going to row? What is the water temperature at which it's not worth it to be in the single, right? What is the heat temperature where you say, you know what, we're going to modify the work because we're not going to throw caution to the wind here when it's 105 degrees and 100% humidity, right? And then the other challenge that happens a lot in rowing is not assessing the conditions while you row, right? I, as a coach, like to pull away from the boats I'm coaching at least once per practice. And I literally just stop and put the engine in neutral because I coach on a river. And I want to see which way the current's actually moving me now. Has it shifted? Is the wind coming from a different direction now? Do I feel a change in the barometric pressure, right? Clouds, when we do a deep dive assessment of lightning, what we're looking for with lightning is when the clouds get vertical and dark, right? When they get, the more vertical and dark a cloud gets, the more it's going to have a separation between positive and negative. Energies going to want to get out, right? So during the row, have those lovely little cirrus clouds become thick, dark, vertical black clouds, right? It's that mid-row assessment, I think, that a lot of times can lead us to a safer place. The other one for independent rowing is having a float plan. In the US Coast Guard, the number one variable in whether or not we will rescue you is the accuracy of the last known position, right? There are a lot of great technologies we have as rowers now. iCrew has a feature you can just click on location notifications. Everyone's cell phone has an app somewhere that you can send a location notification. You can just do Find My iPhone if you're a parent like me, and I always know where my kids are, whether or not they know that. There are ways to share your location, right? There's also just filing a float plan. Does your club have a log somewhere that says Bruce and Tom are taking out the double, they're planning to go north, they're launching at noon, they'll be back at 2, right? Every bit of detail that somebody has about your last known location is the biggest variable in that search area, which is the biggest variable in whether or not you're going to live, right? So please file a float plan with somebody. Just tell your wife where you're going today, or tell your husband, tell your partner. Bring a life jacket. This is a controversial topic, okay? So 33 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations 175.15 gives rowing shells an exemption for life jacket carriage requirements, okay? So yes, we are federally exempt from having life jackets be a required item. The origin of that comes down to the notion that we don't want to see an Olympics with fully inflated orange life jackets and people trying to row, right? I have actually petitioned the Coast Guard it's not going to be successful, to change that requirement to say when a safety boat is present, right? We should not have to bring a life jacket if a safety boat is present due to the conduct of what we do. You can make that case, that's pretty fine. The problem with saying you shouldn't bring a life jacket in a boat when you row with no one else around, that's a pretty hard argument to make in a modern world. Knowing that our number one cause of death is going to be having a medical event and going underwater, having your head above water is pretty obvious and tremendous risk mitigation, right? Modern life jackets, shoulder life jackets, even your waist pack that you flip over your head. If something feels uncomfortable, and I say this to my kids I coach, if all of my coxswains are required to wear life jackets, and that's for 2 reasons. One is there's really no great argument why a coxswain shouldn't wear a life jacket. Like you have to get to some pretty esoteric arguments to try and say why a coxswain is not fair or safe for them to wear one, right? But the thing I like about it, and I've used it as a youth coach, is look, if 3-seat is having a problem, they start vomiting, they're not lucid, they're not responding, pass the life jacket back and put it on them and inflate it, right? One little $3 canister means that now, even if he or she falls overboard, they'll still be breathing air. It's as simple as that, right? So if we're going to row independently, please bring a life jacket. Not just because you might end up in the water, but just to make it safer if somebody's having a medical problem, to stabilize the situation. Bring a mobile phone or a VHF radio. One or the other, right? There are too many cases now. There are too many waterproof cases that, you can, I think whenever I buy a t-shirt at Eddie Bauer, they give me a free one, right? There's too many ways now to bring your mobile phone and have it be safe. And if you're not comfortable with that, or you prefer a VHF radio, and there are advantages to a VHF radio, bring a marine VHF radio, right? Almost every one of them on the market is submersible and floats, right? And the upside, the difference with mobile phone is great because you can, I use Ripmo when I'm rowing my singles, so it's my stroke coach. It can perform other functions. That's great. And I can also tell my wife, turns out I'm slower than I thought. I'm going to be late for dinner. That's a good thing. But with the VHF radio, the good news is when you call for distress on channel 16, there are things called pingers, which are pinging that signal around the country, which means that if you simply are on 16 and say, help, I'm in distress, we know the exact location you're at the Coast Guard Command Center, and that it's being recorded. So whatever information you provide, it's automatically recorded and geolocated. So the VHF radio is a really good device for assistance, although obviously just like walkie-talkies are not as good at, just having a phone call with somebody. So I get questions about that. That's kind of the breakdown. Bring a VHF radio, bring a mobile phone, bring both, right? Why not, right? It's at this point, I could use a little more weight in the bottom of my single to keep it a little more stable when I row. And then I say, know your vulnerability, right? US rowing does not know your vulnerability. And what I mean by that is, we'll take the question of swim tests, for example. We say, you must pass a swim test, or you have to have a swim verification form, which is a pretty interesting hot topic. We allow it because there are times when people literally don't have access to a pool. We'd be telling places without a pool or a place to do a swim test that would mean no new rowers in the spring, right? So we allow for a swim verification form or a swim test, but in the guidelines it says if you cannot swim, you must wear a life jacket while rowing, right? Now, what is the best life jacket for you? I don't know, right? In the Coast Guard, we always say it's the one you'll wear. And that sounds crass, but it's the truth, right? If you buy a life jacket and you don't bring it with you because you don't like the shape of it, or you don't wear it because it's uncomfortable, that's a pretty bad life jacket, right? We have waist packets, we have shoulder harnesses, we have teams like Oklahoma City, their middle school program. I was delighted this summer watching kids that probably had a problem swimming wearing orange life jackets, and they were rowing just fine. I'm not suggesting we should all wear with inflated jackets, but the one you're going to bring or the one you will wear, you feel comfortable operating, that is the right one. So know your vulnerability where you are, right? Water temperature is another one. Cold water is a serious risk, okay? There's a major difference between cold water shock and hypothermia. Cold water shock, when we first hit water, our body basically panics. We gasp, which is an involuntary thing, which means we might swallow water. It's a real problem. What is cold water shock to you might be very different based on where you row and how often you get involved with that water. I would offer that when I grew up in Florida, 60-degree water would feel agonizingly cold, where I don't think it ever has been 60 when I've rowed in Maine. That's what we say about knowing your vulnerability and then creating policies that mitigate your risk. So that's a lot of information. I know I'm pushing a lot of content to you folks today. I don't know if we have any questions in the chat, but I'm totally open to start discussing some of those. And I'm happy to deeper dive. We still have 12 minutes. I know I talk a lot, but there's just so much I care about. I just want us to get to this place where we reduce chance, but we still take risk, but we calculate the risk, we mitigate the risk, and manage as best we can.
Tom, that was amazing. I learned a lot from that presentation as well. We do have a question coming in, and as Tom mentioned, put them in the Q&A if you do have anything more come up. Tom, sticking on the cold water conversation, is there a numerical rule for cold water, air plus water, etc.?
No, that's okay. So that there was a 90-degree rule, which is long populated. There's also the notion of a 100-degree rule. It kind of depends on where you are. Where I'm at in Virginia, we've long used a 100-degree rule because we know that we're not used to what would be a 90-degree rule, right? The challenge I have with those rules is it undervalues the fact that your bigger risk is the water temperature. It's a much bigger problem to have a cold water than cold air, because cold air, you can frankly, if you're in, we'll say 30-degree air, but you have no wind at all, clear skies, and you're rowing an elegant quad that no one's going to be splashing, wear a jacket, buy some pogies, the air is no longer really a great risk to you. Your risk is going to be when you hit the water. So we don't establish a temperature for that, but I fully support whatever a club finds is best for them.
Great, thank you. this is a question for you, Tom, but I think also just to the community. Is there a brand of waist life jacket that people like best?
Ooh. Um, the waist packs, honestly, if they're coast, there isn't a specific brand. I will tell you in my background, if you have the means, I've never had Mustang Survival let me down, right? So Mustang Survival equipment and life saving systems, which is mostly military spec stuff, tends to be really durable, and I tend to break everything I touch. What I will say to you though is, if it is a coast, the thing you're looking for with a PFD life jacket above all else is it Coast Guard certified? Because if it is, it's been tested the same amount of rigor, right? It's been yanked, pulled, submerged, soaked, right? To get that certification at that level is a Coast Guard litmus of tests. So while there might be popular brands, I haven't come across one that was a Coast Guard licensed one that was like, oh, this is a bad idea or it doesn't work.
Thank you.
The key
Um,
with the waist pack though, so the argument with the waist packs is it takes an extra step. Act quicker, right? Meaning like if I'm wearing a waist pack and anything doesn't feel right, I'm putting it over my head, right? Like just don't delay in that reaction is probably the best you can do.
mhm. A question from Gail here. Is a sign out log, so in reference to your float plan, a US rowing requirement for clubs that are mainly independent single rowers, or just a very good idea?
Yeah, if you look in the safety guidelines, we wrote the rewrite on them starts with organizational requirements, and then it goes to coaches, then it goes to athletes. The float plan is written in the guidelines. I'm not going to quote it off the top of my head because I can't remember if it's a should or a shall, but you want to have some variation of a logbook. The logbook is a requirement. And so if your float plan, what level of detail you have in that, again, it's kind of up to you, right? If you're rowing on Hosmer Pond in Vermont, when am I coming and when I'm going is probably enough, right? But if you're rowing where I row, where we have an infinite amount of river, it's really important to know where you plan to go. Are you going to go southwest out towards, are you going to go southeast to Chesapeake Bay, or are you going to go up the Chickahominy, right? So that part's kind of up to you, but the logbook is in our safety guidelines in that first section.
Great. A question from Tom here. Is US rowing advocating for AEDs in the boathouse?
Absolutely. Um, and on the boats. If you, again, now AEDs are expensive, right? And we get asked for, can US Rowing support getting AEDs to people? To be honest with you, I haven't found an avenue by which to do that yet. They are kind of pricey. I will say that most of your county governments, if you have any relationship to a county park or something, a lot of times they'll be glad to provide you with one. The challenge with AEDs is checking the batteries. I often do inspections to help teams out, and I'll go and look, and their AED batteries expired 3 years ago. So when you get an AED, make sure somebody's checking it. That's where your annual safety audit checklist can help you. And on the boats, they're perfectly safe. We used to have a big fear of using them on a wet deck. That is not a safety concern, right? We're not going to put an AED on somebody swimming. But if you're on a boat and you need to use an AED, it will be safe to use. Dry off the chest where the pads go, and the current goes between the pads. That's one of the questions I also get is like, is an AED safe in a boat? And the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. One more question here, but there might be a couple more jumping in. This person's saying, I don't ever recall our club reporting an incident to US rowing. How would we socialize that idea? What are the risks slash benefits?
Yeah, so there is no risk, right? Like the goal of this is not like a tattletale system, right? It's a way for us to know what's going on. Our goal is to get so much reports that actually, and this is an interesting one to think about this from the American perspective on British rowing. They have annual awards for clubs that are entirely based on who reported the most problems. Now that's a pretty counterintuitive thing when you think about it from our typical American sort of lens, right? But the point is that if you get to the point where you're proud to share and you realize that the only ramification, like the only there is no negative consequence because you're getting an award for it and you're making people safe. That's kind of my goal to get to there, right? I haven't seen that used. If somebody's going to use safety against you, it's going to be through the grievance system because they found a code of conduct problem, not because a safety incident occurred. Two very different things.
That answered that perfectly. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
Um, there's no other questions here. We can, you're so thorough, Tom. That was great. Um, Tom,
Yeah.
before we close out, is there anything you want to leave with the group with?
Yeah, I'm the key to making safety work, and I experienced this in the Coast Guard. When I joined, our motto was we don't in the boat world was we have to go out, we don't have to come back. Um, that's not really a good plan for longevity. One of the things I saw change was, and you see this in you got to think the flight industry with this, to be honest with you, is this concept of team coordination, right? If you're the newest new learned rower that's never even been in a boat yet, and you speak up because you have a safety concern, your voice must be heard, right? And I know this is a problem, and this is a master's rowing very specific issue. I get a lot of calls that say, we have, we'll call him Harvey, right? We have Harvey and Harvey won't do a swim test, or Harvey won't follow our plan. And my answer is kick Harvey out of the club. That's it. There's if this is there is no other outcome from that, right? Because if we make those exceptions and we don't say safety is a goal that is positive for us, what are we really doing here? Like, I don't think that's a sport we want to be a part of. It's not one I want to be a part of, right? Rowing is beautiful. It is amazing. It has changed my life. I'm still rowing in a double with my kid. I've been in a quad with my family. Are you kidding me? Right? But the responsibility I owe is that when the next incident happens in rowing, I want to be surprised. I want to be shocked. I want to go, man, I couldn't have thought of that. If you're ever sitting there and hear about a tragedy in rowing, you say, yeah, it was just a matter of time, then we've kind of all failed each other. So with that, I just say, thanks for your time.
Tom, there's a lot of big thank yous in the chat. So thank you for this presentation. And I just want to echo too, I'm lucky enough to work with Tom every day, but I know on that last slide that we just had, there's a QR code. It'll also be available on the Sketch platform. But Tom is incredibly thorough with resources. So I guarantee you will find a lot more tidbits as well and documents that are already provided. So please do visit those. Again, big thank you, one for me personally, Tom, for all that you do for the sport and from our regattas. And then thank you to everybody in the presentation as well for joining us. Before we close out, this is being recorded, so you're going to have this posted within the next day or so. And then just want to send a big thank you for our conference sponsor, Coffee Corporation, for keeping us going this week. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.